Hello, this is Chris Browder, and this is video 2.1. This is an historical overview of SLA theories, or I should say, this is video one of three of this historic overview. All right, so let's see. This segment is intended to provide you with a historic overview of the major theories in second language acquisition. We'll focus on the early theories of second language acquisition. This video is largely based on the texts Understanding Second Language Acquisition by Rod Ellis and How Languages Are Learned by Patsy Lightbound and Nina Spada. SLA is a fairly new academic field, but scholars have been considering the nature of languages and language learning for quite a long time. We could say that SLA begins with a question. That is learning a language different from learning other subjects or skills? If it isn't, then language learning is no different from learning, let's say, auto mechanics or, let's say, U.S. history. And if it really isn't any different, then we don't really need a separate field for SLA. That's basically our existential question. So let's start from there. Going back thousands of years, we have stories of children who were raised in the wild, like the fictional characters Mowgli in Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book or Tarzan from Edgar Rice Burroughs. These children, raised without contact with other humans, were found and brought back into human society and had to learn to speak human languages, right? But interestingly, there are actually documented cases recorded in history of children being raised without human contact. In those cases, people tried to teach the children human languages after the age of 7, but they were unable to do so very well. These children could learn how to put on clothing, learn how to do other complex human things, but could make little progress in learning their first human language. These stories seem to support the assertion that language learning is somehow different from other types of learning. In fact, scholars like Lenneberg have suggested that language learning is a biological function of human beings. This idea is called Inatism. Inatism supposes that humans are biologically predisposed to learn human languages and have special parts of their brains and bodies that have evolved specifically for this purpose. Lenneberg is responsible for the critical period hypothesis, or CPH, which is the idea that humans have a special language learning ability during a set time period, and that time period ends with puberty. If the CPH is true, then children's language learning is very different from adult language learning. If it is true, then children are tapping into some kind of innate gift that adults simply don't have. Today, very few scholars would argue that first language learning is exactly like other types of human learning. But SLA concerns itself with second language learning, not first language learning. Many academics believe that second language learning, like first language learning, is also very different from other types of learning and possibly also based on some biological predispositions. Let's begin to explore that idea with a story about a man named Francois Goin. In 1880, Goin was preparing to travel to Germany to prepare for this trip he had to take. Goin memorized thousands of translations of vocabulary words and hundreds of grammar rules. When he arrived in Germany, however, he realized that all of his memorized knowledge was not helping him to actually communicate at all. When Goin returned to France, he set out to reform the way languages are taught in schools. Inspired by Goin, a man named Karl Kraus went on to create the direct method. The direct method, also known as the natural method and also sold by the brand name the Berlitz method, uses no translation, no explicit grammar instruction, but instead tries to help people learn a language in much the same way that children learn their first language, which is through direct experience, or what you might call immersion. In that way, it appears to be an application of innatist theories of SLA because it claims to utilize learners' natural abilities or intuitions. For example, in the direct method, students learn what the word telephone means by actually seeing and using a telephone instead of having a translation given to them or a definition. The direct method was eventually adopted by U.S. diplomatic, military, and intelligence services and was mostly successful, but it was never really widely used by public school teachers in the USA. But is innatism the only SLA theory that explains why direct experience with language could be more effective than memorizing translation and grammar rules? Let's look at some more early theories of SLA that might help explain why good language teaching is good language teaching. In the early 20th century, a psychologist by the name of Jean Piaget helped found a school of thought called Constructivism. Constructivism supposes that when humans learn, they're actually constructing systems of knowledge in their minds. And this construction comes in predictable stages because new learning is built on previous learning. Like building a house, you start with a foundation, go to the first floor, second floor, third floor, roof. According to Piaget, humans learn when they experience something that challenges their existing knowledge system and forces them to reconstruct their system to adapt to new conditions. So they're trying to apply their existing knowledge to understand what they're experiencing, but it doesn't work. It forces them to rethink what they believe. At about the same time Piaget was doing his work, a Russian psychologist by the name of Lev Vygotsky was also helping found constructivism, kind of in a parallel system in Russia. Vygotsky, like Piaget, also believed humans were constructing systems of knowledge in their minds. Unlike Piaget, Vygotsky was more concerned, however, with how social interaction facilitates human learning. Like Piaget, Vygotsky believed that learning happened in predictable stages because new learning is based on previous learning. But success in reaching the next stage, according to Vygotsky, can be facilitated or sped up when you get help from others. Vygotsky asserted that people could learn independently, but could jump to higher levels faster than normal when they're working with other people. He called that higher level or faster level of learning the zone of proximal development, or ZPD. He noticed that people help each other learn new things. People could learn things independently, but they learn it faster with help. And he called this process by which we help one another scaffolding. And with scaffolding, basically, one learner helps a person do something that they wouldn't normally be able to do independently. Well, so how does this all relate to language teaching? If you think about it, essentially, an effective second language instruction, the teacher activates the learner's background knowledge and then gives learners new experiences that challenge them to acquire something new. That's Piaget, right? Finally, the teacher needs to provide some kind of support, like a word wall, sentence stems, or models that learners can use to do something that they're not able to do independently. And that's scaffolding, right? Now let's change directions, something very different. Let's talk about behaviorism. We've talked about innatism, we've talked about constructivism. Now we're going to talk about behaviorism. So, about the same time Piaget and Vygotsky were doing their work in psychology, a biologist in Russia was conducting experiments on the digestive systems of dogs. That biologist's name was Ivan Pavlov. Pavlov had a lot of dogs. He had a laboratory filled with dogs. When it was dinner time, Pavlov would ring a bell and the dogs would come running. Because he was studying digestion, and which includes salivation, he noticed the dogs in his lab would start salivating every time they heard that bell. So before they even saw the food, before they knew that it was dinner time, they would start salivating at the sound of a bell. Pavlov concluded that the dogs were somehow associating the sound of the bell with eating. Pavlov called this kind of association conditioning and concluded that it was some kind of learning, something biological and something that we could measure objectively and scientifically. Pavlov's idea became the backbone of a school of thought called behaviorism. Behaviorism, unlike constructivism, is not interested in speculating about what is happening inside the mind of a learner. It instead only concerns itself with observable changes in behavior. Behaviorists like B.F. Skinner asserted that learning begins when people imitate behaviors they see other people doing. If people are rewarded for imitating that new behavior, then they will associate the reward with the behavior, and they will repeat the behavior to get more rewards. If people receive negative feedback, such as punishment, they associate the negative feedback with the behavior and then they stop doing it. If behavior is repeated enough, then it becomes a habit and no longer needs to be rewarded. It just continues on its own. So Skinner believed that even human language learning works that way. And in order to explain the difficulty adults have with learning second languages, Skinner simply proposed that the habits from the first language were interfering with the learning of the new language. And he rejected Lenneberg's hypothesis. He believed that the advantage that children had was basically because they were empty, it was easier to fill them up. They didn't have old habits interfering with the development of new habits. Skinner's ideas were applied to create a language teaching method called the audiolingual method, or ALM. ALM, like the direct method, used no translation or explanations of grammar rules. Instead, it just provided models and it drilled students on those models repetitively. When students imitated the models successfully, they were praised. When students made mistakes, however, they were corrected immediately. This method, like the direct method, was also used successfully by U.S. diplomatic, military, and intelligence language programs, but was never successfully used in U.S. public schools. It was not a big hit with students, no. All right, so let's see. That's the end of the presentation. We just talked about older theories of language learning and teaching. Next, we're going to start looking at some more modern theories of language learning and teaching. Thanks. Bye-bye.